Hello, folks. It's Ines Subashka from InspiredFitStrong.com, and I got Dr. Jack Kruse on the call. Hello, Dr. Jack Kruse, and thank you for taking the time to share a piece of yourself and your knowledge with my readers.
Oh, no problem. Anytime at all. It's my pleasure.
If you don't know who Dr. Jack Kruse is, head off to jackkruse.com, and I'm sure that you find yourself reading for hours, astonished by the information you find there. I think that when you ask better questions, you get better answers, and his posts really provoke you to ask these better questions. So since I found your website, I'm really hooked. I read your book, I got a membership about your webinars, and I'm astonished by the information and the discoveries you've made. What was the turning point that made you realize you need to take a different approach towards health?
Well, for me, it was actually a personal injury and a personal insult to my own wellness. And in that process of trying to figure out why what happened to me, another physician's wife turned me on to some pretty cutting edge research about 10 years ago that was being done in the United States. And I put those things together very quickly, and I realized the reason that this happened to me, the reason my wellness went bad, is because my level of understanding was basically taught to me in medical school to be on the biochemical level, but truly to understand what was wrong with me, I had to go down to the subatomic level, to the level where electrons, protons, and neutrons exist. And when I realized that, I actually had to change my whole mindset in what I knew. I usually tell my patients and my colleagues that I erased myself, just like on the third grade blackboard, everything that was put in my head, and I began to think of things with this new perspective, this new scale. And when I did that, after 18 months of going back and relearning quantum physics and understanding how it ties to quantum biology, I was actually able to fix myself. And I've been very well for the last 10 years. And now I'm kind of sharing those insights with people on the internet, you know, for free, so that they can begin to understand how this different perspective and scale has a huge impact on not only illness but also wellness.
Yes, every time I read your posts, I'm really astonished by the information and the different perspective you have. I really think, gosh, why other doctors don't think like him, why they don't research like you do. You have a really full concept of living a healthy lifestyle, and I'm intrigued by the information you provide about EMFs, grounding, and receiving electrons from the ground. Would you explain why being exposed to EMFs and living away from nature is the surest way to gain more fat?
Sure. This could get a little bit complicated without some background, but I'm going to try to make it simple. When you think about non-native EMF from Wi-Fi, from cell phones, from modern technology gadgets, you just need to think about or look up into the atmosphere like I'm doing right now, and you see excess energy. Okay, just like you see, like when a thunderstorm, you know, is over your town where you live, EMF does the same thing. So when that excess energy is there, it basically blocks our cell membranes and our mitochondria's ability to handle electrons appropriately. And when you can't handle electrons, you begin to have major effects, you know, within the cell. And what that major effect is in the cell, it affects mitochondrial function. And one of the things that most people who understand even a little bit about science understand is that on the input to a mitochondria isn't called protein, isn't called fat, isn't called carbohydrate transporters. It's called electron chain transport. And see, there's the link. And any biochemistry book you open up, every doctor in the world, no matter what country they're in, knows that this is true. The interesting thing is the ancestral health community, the alternative community, the paleo community, you very rarely hear them talk about electrons. You hear them talk about, you know, resistant starch, fat, carbohydrates, and all this other stuff. And that's part of the reason why the language they speak and the language I speak are two totally different aspects, and why many times they think what I'm saying makes no sense. And what I'm trying to explain to the world is what they believe is based on that biochemical level. That's not how we work. We work on a quantum level. We work on a subatomic level. And it's my job to try to explain that scale without the fancy math. See, in physics, and especially in quantum physics, to really understand Einstein, Feynman, and guys like Schrodinger, you really need to have an incredible grasp of mathematics, because mathematics is the language of physics. But here's the big but. I always tell people on my site and on my forum that you don't have to speak Chinese to like Chinese food. And that's really kind of how quantum biology is. You just need to know a little bit about physics, and I'm trying to explain that little bit without the math, without people having to delve into, you know, tensor calculus and things like that. I don't think that's necessary. What I do need to do is teach people fundamentally how cell membranes work, and I need to teach them how mitochondria work. And basically what happens is your cell membrane is the antenna for the electromagnetic radiation from the environment, and that information gets transmitted from the cell membrane to the mitochondria. The mitochondria is designed to handle that. When something goes awry in that system, you get poor signaling. And poor signaling is ultimately the reason why all disease happens. Where the poor signaling happens determines what disease you get.
Yes, you really explain complicated topics in a really simple, approachable way. And if people follow their instinct, you know how we always feel good in nature. Probably that's the reason we feel good in nature when we go on a vacation. Most people consider that it's because you don't work, you have some rest, but it's probably because we are surrounded by nature and we got electrons from there.
Well, I think that's absolutely the case. I think one of the big problems with our modern world, no matter where we live, is that we're chronically disconnected from nature. And what really my take-home message is that we need to reconnect with nature, and we need to understand that the most important part of reconnecting with nature, many people believe is food, but it's really not. It's actually the way the cell is organized. There's certain foods that are more important than other foods. For example, anything with DHA is incredibly important because DHA is the critical part in cell membrane chemistry. And most of your readers probably know that the mitochondria have two cell membranes. They have an inner and outer mitochondrial membrane, and those membranes are designed to talk to the cell membrane on the outside of the cell. All the stuff that happens in between there, most people kind of want to know about it, but they really don't want to know all the dirty details. I try to give people those details, but fundamentally, how you live your life, the environment you put in, is the most important, because the environment is really the key to epigenetics. See, I look at our genome, our DNA and our RNA as the hardware, just like, you know, we're talking via Skype on a computer. The computer is the hardware. But what is your listeners and readers learning? They're learning about the information that you and I are sharing. And see, that information is what an electron carries. And that's the single most important factor. It's the software that dictates what the hardware is capable of. That's the single most important thing when it comes to wellness, illness, or even if you're just trying to understand the type of disease that you currently have.
Yes, I really like how you research diseases from evolutionary perspective, and most people really underestimate our influence on our genes, like epigenetics, and how the environment impacts our health, our lifestyle, and well-being. You defend the idea that we have two metabolic pathways. One dominates spring and summer, and the other dominates fall and winter. And because most people are not really into science, would you tell us what that means in terms of carbs and fat intake, when we should eat more carbs and when we should eat more fat?
Sure, I can make this actually really easy to understand, because when I presented this topic to the paleo community in a blog post a long time ago called Cold Thermogenesis 6, I think it stunned a lot of people. because they didn't really understand what compliant design means. And I want to make sure that your readers and your listeners understand what compliant design is. It sounds like a fancy term, but it's really not. What I would assume that almost everybody who you know, and at least I know, has either seen an airplane and seen a bird.
Yes.
Well, the interesting thing is, if you've ever sat next to a wing of a plane, you notice that when it takes off, the flaps of the wing have to do certain things in order for the plane to take off. Well, if you ever looked at a bird on TV, it doesn't have to do that. In other words, the change happens in its wing immediately. In other words, the wing structure is able to go between flight and landing immediately. That is called compliant design. What allows that to happen in life and not in a machine? It's called the movement of electrons onto proteins that change the protein's innate ability to do certain things. That is where the rubber meets the road. And the thing is, anything that is alive has this ability. And people did not realize fundamental issues that happen in mammals. When temperatures go colder, it has huge effects. Why? Because colder temperatures mean there's more electrons in water. All water surrounds proteins in our body. And in that interchange, when there's more electrons added to proteins, it changes their electrostatics, their electrophysiologic capabilities. But the most important thing is it changes their magnetic properties. And those things allow us to do different things. In the second part of your question, you asked me, how is the effect of temperature directly related to food? Well, that's really simple too. You know, carbohydrates only grow in long light cycles. So during the summertime, and I know you're in the northern hemisphere like I am right now, today down in the Gulf of in Mississippi, it's 98 degrees. It's very hot. Yeah. And this is the time of the year where carbohydrates grow very, very easily. Why? Because of the photonic power in the sun's rays. Now, on December 31st, we can't grow the same carbohydrates at our latitude and longitude. Therefore, biology has a plan that we shouldn't be able to eat them. The real issue is humans have become so smart that we can alter our environment by shipping those products from South America up to North America or over to Europe, and then you can eat them. Just because you can eat them doesn't mean you're not going to pay a biologic toll. And what is that biologic toll? The biologic toll is you have less electrons across your mitochondria. It spits out more protons. Protons are positively charged, just like inflammation. Inflammation causes disease. And that's where the linkage comes from.
Yes, I was thinking how we are always trying to be the leanest in summer, and probably that's against our nature. Most animals are the fattest in summer and in autumn, and the leanest in winter. And we are trying to be on a diet and eat less in the summer and be really lean. Is that a problem for our body, our health?
Well, it's when you really realize it, it's become one of the problems of civilization, our culture, and society. No matter what country you live in, you hit the nail on the head with that. Most people do believe, oh, you should eat less and be more fit in the summer. Why? Because everybody wants to look good at the beach. But that's not the way evolution works. If you really look at wild animals, they are scurrying through the wintertime and in the fall to try to get as many nutrients as they possibly can. The way I like to think about it, as many electrons as they can from the environment, so that they can get through the winter. And it's a completely counterintuitive way of doing things, and that's one of the mismatches that create problems, for us, as we go on. That's why I say modern society creates so many mismatches. And we don't realize that we're captives to those beliefs. We need to understand that many of the beliefs that have been taught to us by our parents, by society, by culture, by even the countries we live in, you have to question everything to really, really understand how this really works.
Yes, the other day I was thinking about fasting. Is it true that fasting is easier in winter exactly for the same reason? Because most animals and people are probably evolutionarily adapted to eat less in winter?
Well, I would tell you that I think humans don't have that ability anymore because of our civilization and societal choices. But I will tell you that fasting is completely linked to ketosis and hydration. The real issue, it's become completely divorced in modern human society. But when you look at animals in the wild, that's precisely what happens. And you know, I always like to bring people back to probably the best example that people have in their head about animals. And if you think about bears, bears are mammals like we are. But what people don't realize about bears is they don't have the ability to handle ketosis well. So since they can't handle ketosis well because of their way their GI tract is stable, what do? They offset it by sleeping throughout the whole winter. And that's how they get by with no food. So humans have the ability to handle ketosis. So intermittent fasting is directly tied to a process in our body called autophagy. And autophagy is one of the ways in which we recycle our mitochondria so that they work better. In other words, they work perfectly well within the circadian system that we're in. So in other words, your cell membranes and your mitochondria know exactly what time of the year it is. And there's no, I should say, misconnections between that information. I've said to many people many times, there's a very good blogger here in the United States named Bill Lagados, and he has a blog called Calories Proper. And just in the last year, he's started to point out to the ancestral community that autophagy and the way you handle certain macronutrients is completely different when you have a circadian mismatch in your mitochondria. And that's the key point that I try to make to people. It's not that food is primordial. It's if your redox shifted in your mitochondria, you got big trouble. And the only way to fix that is you have to regain control of both circadian signaling. And one of the ways that humans can do that is through intermittent fasting. That's actually when it helps you. So I would tell you, to fully answer your question, I think modern humans can use intermittent fasting any time of the year because it helps you. But the key factor is if you are leptin resistant, it will not work until you fix that problem initially.
When you said leptin resistant, when it comes to health, most experts take the spotlight on insulin and consider leptin response to be a consequence of insulin signaling. Why do you think that leptin is actually the key player? Would you sum up your theory?
Well, it's actually very simple to understand. When people talk about insulin resistance, they automatically think about insulin resistance from a pathologic standpoint, meaning like type 2 diabetes or metabolic syndrome. But what they don't realize is that insulin resistance also has a physiologic role in ketosis, in starvation, and also in brain development for infants. They're designed to be insulin resistant up until they're almost 25 years old to myelinate their brain. So when you understand that very, very fact, you start to realize that insulin resistance has a key role. Here's the interesting conundrum that people don't realize. Insulin resistance has very little to do with fertility. What is the key metric in evolution? It's actually to have another generation. Well, guess what? When you're leptin resistant, you can't have another baby. But when you're insulin resistant, you can still have a child. So when you understand that very foundational principle, then you begin to say, which one is really more important from an evolutionary standpoint? And that's the reason I pointed out in a blog post that I wrote called EMF2, is that leptin resistance is really what leptin is in a nutshell. It's the master hormone that controls every other hormone in the body. But what is its quantum foundation? It's an electron accountant. In other words, it counts the electrons that are in our system. It also counts how many protons in our system. So when we have too many protons and not enough electrons, you're leptin resistant. Insulin resistance is a totally different ballgame. It's probably the one that most of the ancestral community and probably biochemists and even medicine doctors talk about, because that's what you hear. But just because you talk about it a lot doesn't mean that it's the most important aspect of the health paradigm. When you begin to understand leptin resistance, leptin controls selection of the eggs from your ovary. It also controls spermatogenesis in males. That means it directly controls fecundity and it directly controls fertility. And when you consider worldwide that infertility is growing by leaps and bounds, and in certain parts of the world, you know, we get a lot of trouble in the United States about infertility as it's growing. But if you look at a country like Australia, it's unbelievable how much infertility is there. And again, that's tied to their own environmental issue that's out there. But what's fundamental for people to understand is why this is happening. And that's the key.
Yes, I think that we rarely ask ourselves why, and we are just believing myths and never applying our critical thinking, and maybe that's why we have so much trouble and disease.
Well, that's true. And, you know, the big thing is what leptin resistance is in a nutshell is that it's called electron steal syndrome from our environment. In other words, our environment is stealing more electrons from us than normal.
Yes, I really like your theory about the semiconductors and how we lose energy to our environment.
Yes, the semiconductor issue, I would tell you, is a very, very interesting one. And without getting into tremendous amounts of detail, I would tell your readers and listeners to just read one of Dr. Robert O. Becker's books. Probably the easiest one is called The Body Electric. It will explain to you how he was the first, he was actually the first biologist, first scientist, first medical doctor to ever prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that we use semiconduction in all of our physiologic systems. And I actually learned about Dr. Becker when I was a neurosurgery resident because most of the work that he did was on bone physiology. And that's actually where he proved that we actually took the photoelectric power of the sun in our periosteum and converted it to mechanical energy in our bone. And that's actually how bone regenerates in all mammals. This is not just humans. This has been reproduced in every single mammal on this planet.
Yes, his books are on my reading list. You recommended them and I ordered them, so I'm really gonna read them. It sounds really interesting and I'm sure it will open my eyes and my knowledge a lot. And if there is one association I make with cold thermogenesis, it is definitely Jack Kruse. In your book, you describe how cold causes rapid leptin sensitivity, its effects on the hypothalamus, and how it induces the formation of brown adipose tissue, and how we could actually train our brain out of chronic pain if we alter its environment. In your opinion, what is the biggest advantage of using cold thermogenesis?
All right, that's a loaded question.
Yes, it is.
I'm going to make it very, very simple. I wrote a blog post that I'd like all your readers and listeners to go read before they understand this answer. It's called Energy and Epigenetics 4. And in that blog, I make the case that all life, no matter where it is located, comes down to three things. Those three things are the photoelectric effect, magnetism, and water. So, since you asked me about CT, what is CT directly tied to? I call that three-legged stool of life, and I'll get into it a little bit deeper. I want your readers and listeners to think about the planet Earth. We have all three on this planet. I want you to go out tonight, look up in the stars, and look for Mars. Mars is their nearest, closest neighbor. It has photoelectric effect. It has frozen water at the poles, but what doesn't it have? It has no magnetic field, okay? And yeah. Mars is a dead red planet, okay? CT directly ties to magnetism. And I'm going to explain to you how it does. What does magnetism do to matter, okay? And I want you to think about our bodies as matter, because it's what it is. It's really protein polymers. Cold condenses matter, meaning it makes it tighter. And that's exactly what CT does. Now, most people in biology don't understand what that means, but condensed matter in quantum physics correlates to something that Einstein called a Bose-Einstein condensate. And anytime you think about matter, you have to realize from his equation called E equals mc squared, which we know is mass equivalence. Basically, what Einstein taught us in that equation is that all mass is condensed energy, okay?
Yes.
And from that perspective, when you realize that cold condenses the energy in our body, it allows us to be more efficient. Because what does it do? It orders our biology. It orders the things that we're made from. So the way I like to think about that three-legged stool when it comes to health, I want everybody to think about the computer or their phone that they're using. Everybody knows that they work on little technology chips, semiconductor chips. Well, how does a chip start? It's made out of silicon. We're made out of carbon, so that's different. But the silicon chip is then cut with a laser. It's called an integrated circuit board. What goes on that circuit board? Little transistors, okay? The integrated circuit board holds the transistors in place. Well, guess what the integrated circuit board is like? It's like the magnetic field. It holds those little charges in place. What is the photoelectric effect? It's the electric current that you plug your phone into to allow it to work. And that's precisely how things work. The magnetic field controls the electrostatic charges. That means electrons and protons, so that they do the things that our protein polymers allow it to do. The colder it is, the more tight, the less chaos is present. The warmer it is, the higher the temperature goes up, the more chaos is present and the more swelling we get. Most of us know that process by inflammation. Well, CT decreases inflammation because it increases electrons and decreases protons by increasing our magnetism. And to make it even more interesting or maybe more complicated, people know that mitochondria, the end product of electron chain transport, those electrons move down through the 4 cytochromes and then they get to the 5th cytochrome, which is called the ATPase that makes ATP. But what does those electrons eventually go to? It goes to oxygen. Here's the interesting thing about diatomic oxygen. It has very special magnetic qualities. So you know what that means? The more oxygen that a mitochondria makes, the larger magnetic field it has. And most people will say, well, doc, how come if I put a magnet on my body, it doesn't stick? Okay? And they want to know if oxygen's not magnetic. And that's absolutely true. But the field, the magnetic field we're talking about, is extremely small. And just in the last 10 years, we now have things called MEG machines, MEG machines that can measure the magnetic encephalographic fields from our heart and our brain. Most people know about the ones that I use in my practice, which is EEGs. That measures the electric and magnetic potential of your brain. We have the same thing in the heart. Well, even though that magnet doesn't stick to you, you know what it means? It means that you have magnetic fields within you that we can measure. And guess what? Your biology uses that to your advantage so that you can do the things that you're able to do. My job is to explain to you how this process works in you.
Yes, the paradox is that technology is designed based on the way we function, or at least it's similar, and we have a better knowledge about technology and absolutely no knowledge about the way our body functions and how it's supposed to work.
Well, that's absolutely true. I think when you really get to the fundamentals, when you ask me the fundamental question of why technology is bad for us, technology all over the world is based on silicon. Silicon has a higher atomic mass, and we're based on carbon. Carbon is lower atomic mass. What does Einstein's mass equivalent say? Anytime you have a higher atomic mass, you have to use more energy. So that means when we hold something made out of silicon close to us, like, you know, the headphones you have on right now,
yes,
those things are stealing electrons from you. Why? Because they're made out of silicon and you're made out of carbon. So it's taking the electrons out of you.
Yes, that's true.
We need to be aware of that. That means that you have to reconnect. You have to plug back into earth, just like a tree. Take your shoes off, go outside, put your skin in the canopy of light to get photons from the environment. Now you have to be able to capture them, and that's where DHA comes into the equation. And that's why I wrote my book about DHA, so people would understand it's the only lipid, the only chemical for 600 million years in evolutionary history that's never been replaced in the eukaryotic kingdom. Okay, never one time. Why? Because what does it have? What special quality does it have? It takes light and turns it into electricity, and takes electricity and turns it into light. That makes it the ultimate transducer to get that information from cell membranes to our mitochondria. That's the reason why it's important.
When you mentioned DHA, you recommend eating a lot of seafood, and would you tell us what is the connection between eating more seafood and how it influences our DHA?
Sure. Though DHA, most people know, is a polyunsaturated fat. It's very special because of the atomic chemistry that it has. It has 6 double bonds in it, and the reason those double bonds are important is it makes this cloud above the carbons called a pi electron cloud, and it's spelled Pi. That pi electron cloud allows it to have very special electrical properties, and those electrical properties have to be inserted into certain places on your cell membrane in order to generate huge electric currents, okay? And I wrote a blog post a long time ago called What Powers Life and Death, and in that blog post I told people that our cell membranes can hold charges in them that carry the same voltage that a bolt of lightning has. In fact, one mitochondria, if we scaled it out, could heat and electrify 1,500 homes in the United States. That's how powerful it is. And people don't realize it because our cell membranes are only 4 to 5 nanometers thick. And anytime you reduce the thickness, you increase the voltage tremendously. That's why DHA is important. But here's the key thing. Most people think in, I think, alternative health, even in medicine, and I think in the paleosphere, you know, in blogs, that you can get DHA simply from supplements. And that's not true. And it's not true for a couple of reasons. DHA, when it's in a supplement form, is very sensitive to sunlight, and it's very sensitive to temperature. So if you keep it in a warm place or you keep it in a place with light, it becomes oxidized. It becomes, you know, just like trans fats from McDonald's. It's not good, okay? But in seafood, it has a special position. And as most of your listeners probably know, fats in all mammals come built on a glycerol backbone, and that glycerol backbone has 3 carbons. Well, DHA, in order to get into your cell membranes and your brain, has to be in a special position. Has to be in the middle position, the SN2 position. Guess what? Seafood has it in that position. The stuff that you buy from the store, the stuff you buy from the internet, because it's made chemically, sometimes it's in SN1, sometimes it's in SN3, and that doesn't work because it has to be in SN2 because of its electrical and magnetic properties to allow it to get into the brain so that it can be incorporated into cell membranes so it can work to change light to electricity and electricity to light.
That's really interesting. I think that nature has packaged what our body needs in the form of food, and it's way better to give it to our body through food instead of buy supplements. So I really hope that most people will hear what you said and eat more seafood instead of just rely on supplements.
Well, I agree with you. I think people in Europe get this message way better than we do in the United States because, you know, here in the United States, everything is about like fast food. You know, they want a pill for every ill. They don't want to go and, you know, prepare their food and do the things that need to be done. When I go to Europe, one of the things that makes me smile is that over there, food is a big deal. You know, almost every country I've ever been in, it's, you know, a major production. And the quality of the food chain in most countries is pretty good. You know, I always think about France because France, you know, tries to keep everybody away from their dairy, everybody away from their meat, and everybody thinks they do it because they're arrogant. I'm glad they do it because that's part of the reason why I think their country and their population has less heart disease than our country here in the United States.
Yes, that's true. The sad part is that most countries look to the USA as an example, and we are slowly following that example with the pills and the fast food chains. So I hope that people will read your blog every day and get inspired to really change their life and be example for people around them, because you really have some really great things to say and share that not very people share with people and know.
Well, I really believe that we need to share with each other because, you know, there's many great things about technological process. I mean, look, we're a perfect example is the fact that you're in Bulgaria and I'm down in Louisiana, and we can talk
Yes.
right now over the internet, which is, you know, a phenomenal thing because we would have no way in which to share electrons. Every time that we share thoughts, what are we really doing? We're sharing a thought that was formed by electrons in our brain. And that's a wonderful thing, but we need to become aware of the bad things. And we need to understand that the same key that opens the doors to heaven opens the doors to hell. And when we use too much blue light, we introduce too much stress to our life, we're basically declining the amount of DHA in our cell membranes, and that disconnects us from our nature. So as many good things that happen in my country when it comes to technology and food, I think many more bad things come from it because we are focusing far too much on that technological process and not realizing what kind of biologic effects it has on us.
Yes, that's true. And technology is a good thing, but we should try to spend more time in nature. And I have a question that I'm sure my readers are really curious to hear your answer. It is a widely spread notion that women need carbs in order to be in good health. What is your take on women called thermogenesis and a higher fat diet? Do you have a different diet prescription for men and women?
Yeah, I totally disagree with that. And I think if you really go back and listen to this call carefully, I make the case that when you have more carbs, you have more protons. When you have more protons, you have more inflammation. Inflammation generally is not good for women. Women are designed to be more sensitive to the environment. And the reason for that is you have all the eggs in your ovary. And you have to pass the environmental information on to that child in a transgenerational epigenetic fashion. Men do not have that. And that's part of the reason why women need to have a higher seafood diet because they need a higher amount of DHA, they need a higher amount of iodine. And just from an evolutionary perspective, women tend to have less myelin in their body, on their nerves. And the reason for that is because that makes you more sensitive to electromagnetic radiation from the environment. And I told everybody this early on. This is why children are so susceptible to cell phones, because they don't have good myelinated brains. Well, women are the second class of humans that have less myelin, and that makes you more sensitive to those things. So you really need to have an electron-dense diet, and that should be a diet that's loaded in the marine seafood chain. And remember, where do fish and shellfish live? In the water. What's in the water? Electrons. That's the reason why you drop a toaster in your bathtub, you will get electrocuted, because there's electrons in there. And that's the kind of thing that I need people to focus in on. That I would tell you that's an ancestral paleo belief that you need carbohydrates. I don't ascribe to that at all, because it makes no sense from a quantum perspective, especially when you understand how mitochondria truly work.
Yes, I'm glad you explained all of this. I myself eat a high-fat diet, and I've never felt better. I'm in the best shape of my life, and my health is great. So I really try to spread the same notion about women eating a higher-fat diet. So thank you for explaining it this way.
No problem.
Before you became a neurosurgeon, you used to be a dentist, and I read a book by Ramiel Nego, Cure to Decay, based on Weston Price's researches. That's where I first understood that tooth health is once again about proper hormonal signaling and proper remineralization through eating the right foods. What is your take on this? Do you support the idea that about curing your teeth naturally?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. Carbohydrates are the cause of tooth decay. Even dentists in the United States will tell you that. The problem they have is they believe that fluoride helps, prevent them. That's totally not true. The key thing that helps is all the fat-soluble vitamins. I even wrote a blog post about that called the Teeth and Disease, and that was a long time ago. And the key metrics there are all the fat-soluble vitamins: vitamin A, D, K, K2, and vitamin E. And there's a very interesting hypothalamic loop that goes between your parotid gland and the brain that ties to the minerals within your saliva. And the minerals within your saliva actually will help remineralize and actually improve the immune status of your gums, your periodontal tissue, and also the collagen that connects your tooth root to your bone. The key to good teeth is high-fat, low-carb diet. I mean, it's not even, this is one of the few times that I would say conventional dentistry is completely correct. The only thing they're correct in is how to keep that maintenance going forward, and fluoride is something that we should all avoid.
Yes, what do you think about fluoride and the way it affects us on cellular level?
Well, yeah, I can explain to you very, very easily. You've heard me talk this entire time about electrons.
Yes.
Okay? Well, iodine is designed to be next to DHA in the most, how shall we say, the most harsh environment of our body. What's the most harsh environment of our body for a polyunsaturated fat? That's called the neural synapse. That's where two nerve cells meet together. What does iodine have a lot of? If you look at the periodic table, it's in group 7A. That means it has 7 electrons. Well, guess what else is in 7A? Fluoride. What's the difference between fluoride and iodine? Their atomic mass. So that means fluoride holds on to her electrons very, very tight. Iodine has a much bigger nucleus, so it can't hold on to her electrons. So what does iodine do with DHA? She shares her electrons with DHA so that it cannot become oxidized. That's the reason why it's important. So what does fluoride do when we use it in water or toothpaste and anything else? It completely breaks collagen down. In other words, collagen, I want everybody to think about as a rope. It's a triple helix that's tied together. What fluoride does to it is it unwinds it. This is the reason why, like here in the United States, there's a very popular class of antibiotics called fluoroquinolones. And it's very commonly used. I think it's used in Europe a lot. One of the common side effects is that you get Achilles tendon ruptures and ACL tears from this. The reason why is because the fluoride intercalates into the collagen triple helix and it unwinds it. And that's a big problem. When it unwinds, Robert Becker taught us, you lose your piezoelectric current. So when you lose your piezoelectric current, what does that mean for physiologic functioning? It means it's terrible. So iodine and DHA are kind of like the perfect marriage between man and woman. One has the electrons, the other one shares them, and when they're together, it's a good marriage. When you introduce the bad person, the bad man, or the bad girlfriend, that's fluoride. And that breaks up that marriage in terms of how they work physiologically in the body.
Yes, I hope that after my readers and listeners heard this, they'll be more careful with taking fluoride as a prescription for better health, because most doctors really give fluoride for better health, and that's ridiculous. But if you had to sum up your philosophy about life and health, what would it be?
Well, that's simple. Use nature as your backstop. I always tell people that, especially in the last 2 years on my blog, when I've taken everybody from the biochemical to the quantum level, that E equals MC squared scales everywhere on this planet and everywhere in the universe. No matter where you look, that is a fundamental law of nature. When you begin to realize that everything that I'm teaching people scales back to that equation, back to mass equivalence, you begin to understand why I began to use that. Because if I'm wrong, I have good company. That means Einstein's wrong too. And I don't believe that he is wrong. Our job as modern humans, in my opinion, is to understand how biology uses mass equivalence in order to make life organize and work well. And that's really what I'm trying to do on my blog. It's what I try to do in my books. It's what I try to do when someone interviews me and talks to me. I want people to fundamentally understand how nature works its magic, how she weaves her webs, and basically we're the fabric of those webs. And you need to realize that that small little piece scales all the way back to many tremendous things. And I think when you live in that world, you begin to see biology and medicine and health in a completely new way.
Yes, the more we know, the better we choose. So I think that the information you provide really helps a lot of people have a different perspective on life and choose better for themselves and improve their health and lifestyle. And I have one last question. Not that I'm a Bulgarian and that I love my country, but I think we have really great nature and the perfect premises for cold thermogenesis and getting electrons from the ground. So would you, I'd like to invite you to come to Bulgaria. Would you and your wonderful wife consider a vacation here someday, probably?
Actually, to be honest with you, we were just in Europe not that long ago, and I actually maybe headed back to Europe pretty soon. I actually love Europe because I think the people there, I don't want to say far smarter than Americans, but Americans are addicted to technology. They're addicted to our culture, our fast food, our, you know, there's, like I said, when they get sick, they want a pill. Europeans are so much more practical, and I think part of the reason for that is you guys in your history have dealt with some serious problems, you know, and Americans, what we call serious problems, I think the last time we had a real serious problem was maybe the Civil War or the Revolutionary War. We've had it pretty good in our country, and I honestly believe that comfort is the reason why we embrace technology. And I think to really, really say why Europeans get it better than we do, I think they know how to understand discomfort. Discomfort's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it opens your eyes to a new reality, to a new way to live and a new way to do things. And you guys have done a way better job, you know, shunning technology, limiting what corporate interest and how capitalism can really affect different aspects of life. But the big thing is in food. You know, you've protected your food chain way better than we have. We've completely synthesized our food. Our food here is almost 100% fake. And that's why we have so much trouble. So yeah, I would have zero problems coming to Europe. And believe it or not, one of my new compatriots is trying to get me to open clinics all throughout Europe. That's part of the reason why I'm going to meet with him in October of this year to see if that's actually something that's feasible for us to do, because I actually think it's going to be easier to deal with this actually in probably Asia and Europe and probably around the Mediterranean that will in the United States, because in the United States, the powers that be in medicine want to control people by controlling what they can and can't do. And that is that's a fundamental big problem for people. Now, I don't think people realize those political forces that are at play are huge. You know, what my government's doing right now in healthcare, I have a huge problem with. But the problem is, I think that healthcare can be solved very, very easily when we give the power back to the people and teach them actually how nature works in them. And if you just get out of nature's way, you know, and you take all your beliefs that you currently have and just live Mother Nature's way, guess what? You'll stay away from guys like me for a long time.
Yes, you said about giving the power to people, but a person has power when he has knowledge. So I think that Europe needs Dr. Jack Kruse and your knowledge. So it's great that you intend on coming here and spreading your knowledge and your work.
I'll do my best, that I can tell you.
Yes, thank you for that. I'd like to ask you a billion more questions, but I know you're busy, and thank you. It's an honor for me to have this interview, and thank you for taking your time and sharing it with me and my listeners. And have a wonderful trip and time in nature, and thank you once again for your time.
Thank you, and it was very enjoyable. Anytime.
Thank you. Bye, Dr. Jack Kruse.
Okay, bye-bye.